The Montana sky stretched, endless and indifferent above her. Sarah Tenebrae stood at the edge of her property, where the pines gave way to open land, watching the sun bleed out across the western horizon. 4 years in this place. 4 years of silence, broken only by wind through timber and the occasional crack of a rifle when she took clients into the backcountry. 4 years running from a voice she couldn't silence. The hunting season had ended 2 weeks ago. Her last client, a cardiologist from Boston, had tipped well and told her she had a gift for reading the land. She'd smiled politely and driven him back to town, knowing the only thing she could read anymore was the weight of her own failures. The cabin behind her was small, one room, a wood stove, a bed she rarely used for sleeping. The nightmares made sure of that. On the shelf above the stove sat a single photograph face down. She hadn't looked at it in 6 months. Didn't need to. The image was burned into her memory with the permanence of scar tissue. 4 men and 2 women in tactical gear, faces painted, eyes hard. Project Sentinel, the team that never existed, the operations that never happened, the people who were never supposed to come home. Sarah turned from the sunset and walked back inside. The wood floor creaked under her boots. She poured coffee from the pot she'd made that morning, now thick and bitter with age. She drank it anyway. Bitterness was something she'd grown accustomed to. The letter arrived at 4:17 p.m. She heard the mail truck from half a mile out, the engine grinding up the dirt road that led to her property. Unusual. Mail came Tuesdays and Fridays. This was Thursday. Sarah moved to the window, hand instinctively moving to the Glock holstered at her hip. The truck stopped at her mailbox. The driver, an older man named Earl who'd worked the route for 30 years, didn't wave like he usually did. He placed something in the box and left quickly, dust plume trailing behind his vehicle like a question mark. Sarah waited 5 minutes. Old habits. Watch, assess, move only when certain. The mailbox stood alone at the end of her drive, a rusted metal sentinel marking the boundary between her world and everything else. She approached it with the same caution she'd once used moving through hostile territory. The box creaked open. Inside, a single envelope. No postage, no return address, just her name written in careful block letters, Sarah Tenebrae. Her real name, not the alias she'd used to buy this property, not the fake ID she carried. Her actual name, the one that had been declared dead 4 years ago in a classified report filed somewhere in the Pentagon's basement. Someone knew who she was. Someone knew where she was. Sarah carried the envelope back to the cabin. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she cleared the table, checked the perimeter cameras she'd installed her first week here, and loaded a fresh magazine into her rifle. Only then did she sit down and break the seal. Inside, a single photograph, and beneath it 7 words written in the same block letters, "He's still breathing. You have 30 days." The photograph showed a man in a concrete cell, thin to the point of emaciation, bruises shadowing his face like continents on a map of pain. But the eyes were unmistakable. She'd seen those eyes laugh, seen them focus down a rifle scope, seen them look at her with absolute trust as he stayed behind to cover her escape. Dylan Kress, the man she'd left to die. Sarah's hands didn't shake. They'd stopped shaking 3 years ago, right around the time she'd stopped feeling much of anything. She studied the photograph with clinical precision. The concrete walls were unpainted. The light source came from above, harsh and institutional. Dylan's beard was long unkempt, his left eye swollen shut. But he was alive. The room tilted slightly. Sarah stood, walked to the sink, ran cold water over her hands. The voice she'd been running from spoke clearly now. No longer a whisper in her nightmares, but a scream in her waking hours. "Sarah, don't leave me, Sarah." Romania. December 2020. An operation that never happened to extract intelligence that officially didn't exist. The team had split under fire. Dylan providing covering fire from a building that was supposed to be abandoned. Then the explosion. The collapse. And Admiral Ashcroft's voice crackling through her earpiece, "Mission Priority Alpha. Exfil now, that's an order." She'd obeyed, driven away while Dylan's voice cut through the static, growing fainter with each second. The last thing she'd heard before the radio went dead, "Sarah, please." They'd declared him killed in action, gave his parents a flag and a story about a training accident. Sarah had attended the funeral from a distance, watching through binoculars from a hillside while they buried an empty casket. She'd believed it, had to believe it, because the alternative meant she'd left him alive, abandoned him to whatever hell waited in that collapsed building. Now this photograph said different. Sarah returned to the table, turned the photo over. On the back, GPS coordinates and a single word, Belarus. She pulled out her laptop, the one with encryption protocols that would make NSA analysts weep, typed in the coordinates. The location marked a point 50 kilometers from the Belarus-Ukraine border. Disputed territory, warlord country, the kind of place where governments pretended not to look and men disappeared into holes no one bothered to dig them out of. 30 days. Someone wanted her to know, wanted her to come. The question was why. Bait for a trap, genuine intelligence from a source who thought she'd care, or something else entirely. Sarah closed the laptop, walked to the shelf, picked up the face-down photograph and turned it over. Project Sentinel. 12 faces staring back at her, 8 men, 4 women. The experimental unit that was supposed to prove anyone could be forged into an elite operator if you broke them down hard enough and built them back up harder. She found Dylan's face, fourth from the left back row, that crooked smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd been a Marine before Sentinel. Force Recon, the kind of operator who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. But he'd volunteered anyway, same as her. Same reason too, because when someone tells you you're not good enough, the only answer is to become better than they can imagine. Sarah's finger traced the faces, 2 dead in training, 3 more during operations. Admiral Ashcroft had shut down the program after Romania scattered the survivors, buried the records under classifications so deep they might as well be carved in bedrock. 7 left, 7 people who knew what they'd done, what they'd become, what they'd lost. And now one of them was in a cell in Belarus breathing when he should be dead. Sarah made her decision in the time it took to finish her cold coffee. She would go. Not because someone wanted her to, not because of orders or duty or any of the lies they'd told themselves during Sentinel. She'd go because Dylan Kress had saved Garrett Blackwood's life in Mosul back in 2008, taking shrapnel that ended Blackwood's career, and earned Dylan a reputation as someone who never left people behind. She'd go because he'd stayed behind in Romania, so the rest of them could complete a mission that meant nothing to anyone except the politicians who'd ordered it. She'd go because for 4 years she'd lived with the sound of his voice calling her name while she drove away. She'd go because it was the only choice that meant she was still human. The drive to San Diego took 18 hours. Sarah pushed her truck hard through the night, stopping only for gas and coffee. The landscape changed from mountain forest to high desert to the brown hills of Southern California. She didn't listen to music, didn't call ahead, just drove with the single-minded focus that had gotten her through Hell Week, through Sentinel training, through the operations that still woke her up at 3 a.m. with her hand reaching for a weapon. She reached San Diego at dawn. The city was waking up, traffic beginning to clot the freeways. Sarah navigated by memory to a neighborhood she hadn't visited in 3 years. Modest houses with small yards, American flags hanging from porches. The kind of place where people waved to their neighbors and believed in the goodness of institutions. She parked 2 blocks away from her destination, watched the house for 20 minutes. Old habits. A man in his 60s emerged to collect his newspaper, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints complained in the morning. Reverend Malcolm Strand, former Navy chaplain. The only person from her old life she'd trusted enough to stay in contact with, and even that had been sporadic. Sarah waited until he went back inside before approaching. She knocked 3 times, paused, knocked twice more. Their old signal from when Strand had served as Sentinel's spiritual counsel, the man who'd listened to their confessions and tried to convince them their souls weren't already forfeit. The door opened. Strand's face registered shock, then something like relief. Sarah. His voice carried the warm gravel of a man who'd spent decades preaching to sailors. I'd hoped I'd never see you again. Meant you were finding peace. Can I come in? He stepped aside. The house smelled of coffee and old books. The walls carried photographs of Strand's 40 years in the Navy, ship's ceremonies, chaplains' conferences. And tucked in the corner, barely visible, a single photo of 12 operators who'd never officially existed. Strand poured coffee without asking. They sat at his kitchen table in silence for a long moment. Dylan's alive, Sarah said. Strand's hand stopped halfway to his cup. That's not possible. I presided over his memorial service. Someone sent me proof, photo, coordinates, 30-day deadline. She slid her phone across the table, the photograph displayed. Strand studied it, his chaplain's training, allowing him to look at suffering without flinching. Belarus region, I heard rumors. Warlords in that area have been trading in American POWs, selling them to the highest bidder. Intelligence, training, sometimes just for sport. How long have you known? 6 months, maybe longer. Intel's fragmentary. I tried to verify through official channels. Got shut down hard. Someone didn't want questions asked. He looked up from the phone. I thought about telling you. Decided it was crueler to give you hope that might be false. Sarah took the phone back. Hope's got nothing to do with it. He's alive. I left him. I'm gonna get him. Sarah, you followed orders in Romania. Ashcroft ordered you to exfil. I chose to follow those orders. I heard Dylan calling for help, and I drove away because a man I'd known for 6 months told me to. That choice is mine. The guilt is mine, and the fix is mine. Strand leaned back, studying her with the eyes of a man who'd heard thousands of confessions. What do you need from me? Information, access, and your blessing if you've got one to spare. Information I can provide. Access will be harder. But blessing, he smiled sadly. You've never needed my permission to do what's right, Sarah. That's what made you one of the best, and one of the most dangerous. Strand walked to a locked cabinet in his study, returned with a folder. I kept files, unofficial. Everything I learned about Sentinel after Ashcroft shut it down, locations of the remaining operators, status updates when I could get them, and intelligence on Dylan's situation. Sarah opened the folder. Her hands remained steady even as her pulse kicked up. Maps, photos, intelligence reports marked with classifications that meant they'd been stolen or leaked, and a timeline of Dylan's captivity. Captured December 2020, sold to a former Spetsnaz operator named Dmitry Volkov in January 2021, held in various locations across Eastern Europe. Current location assessed as a compound 50 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Volkov's specialization extracting tactical intelligence from special operations prisoners and selling it to hostile intelligence services. 4 years of torture, 4 years of interrogation, 4 years of Dylan Kress being broken down piece by piece while the government that trained him pretended he didn't exist. Senator Russell Hardwick, Sarah said, reading a name that appeared repeatedly in the reports. He's connected to this. Hardwick authorized half of Sentinel's operations when he was on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Black budget, deniable ops, the kind of missions that win wars in the shadows but lose elections in the light. Strand's voice hardened. He's running for president now, polling first in the primaries. If Dylan talks, if he testifies about what Sentinel really did, Hardwick's campaign dies. Maybe Hardwick faces war crimes charges. So Hardwick wants Dylan dead. Hardwick wants Dylan to have never existed, same as Ashcroft, same as everyone who benefited from what you all did in the dark. Strand closed the folder. You go after Dylan, you're not just fighting a warlord. You're fighting your own government, people who will kill to keep secrets buried. Sarah stood. Then I better move fast. Sarah, this is suicide. Maybe, but it's my choice. First real choice I've made in 4 years. She turned to leave. Strand called after her. If you're going to do this, you need to see Ashcroft. Whatever you think of him, he's got resources you'll need. Ashcroft gave the order that left Dylan to die. And he's been dying slowly ever since. Heart condition. 6 months left, maybe less. Man's got regrets heavy enough to crush him. Maybe you both need this. Sarah paused at the door. Where is he? Where he always is, Coronado. Still pulling strings even in retirement. Still trying to protect what's left of Sentinel. Strand walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder. Be careful, Sarah. The people you're about to confront, they've got everything to lose. That makes them more dangerous than any warlord. Good. Dangerous, I understand. The drive to Naval Base Coronado took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Sarah had been here a dozen times during Sentinel training. The base sat on a peninsula surrounded by water, a fortress of American military power. The SEAL training facility occupied prime real estate where the best of the best were forged through controlled suffering. Sarah parked outside the main gate, pulled out her expired military ID, the one that said she was Lieutenant Sarah Tenebrae, SEAL Team 7, even though no such team officially existed. The guard at the gate was young, maybe 23. He looked at the ID, then at Sarah, confusion crossing his face. Ma'am, this ID expired 4 years ago. I know. I can't let you on base with expired credentials. Then call your supervisor. The guard hesitated. Sarah waited. Patience was something the service had taught her. Patience and the ability to read people. This kid was uncertain, following protocols, but not hostile. He'd escalate rather than make a decision. 2 minutes later, an MP vehicle arrived. 2 military police officers, both older, both carrying themselves with the alertness of men who'd seen combat. The senior MPA staff sergeant with the Gulf War ribbons took her ID. Lieutenant Tenebrae, haven't seen that name in a while. You know me. Saw your file. Back when we were told to forget we ever saw your file. He studied her carefully. You're supposed to be dead. Clearly, that was exaggerated. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us. You understand this is a security situation. Sarah raised her hands slowly, non-threatening. I understand. I'm here to see Admiral Ashcroft. He'll verify my identity. The MPs exchanged glances. The staff sergeant spoke into his radio voice low, a conversation Sarah couldn't hear. Then, ma'am, please step out of the vehicle. Keep your hands visible. They cuffed her with professional courtesy. Not rough, but not gentle. Sarah didn't resist. She'd planned for this. Needed this, actually. Getting arrested was the fastest way to get Ashcroft's attention, and she needed him to know she was serious. The interrogation room was exactly what she expected. Concrete walls painted institutional beige, metal table bolted to the floor. One-way mirror, single door with reinforced hinges. She'd been in rooms like this before, on both sides of the table. They left her alone for 30 minutes. Standard procedure. Let the suspects stew, get nervous, start talking to themselves. Sarah sat perfectly still, breathing steady, mind clear. She'd endured Hell Week, survived Sentinel training, operated in hostile territory where one mistake meant death. An interrogation room in San Diego might as well be a spa. The door opened. A man in his early 50s entered, carrying a file folder. Salt and pepper hair, sharp eyes, the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in intelligence work. He wore the uniform of a Navy Lieutenant Colonel ribbons, including a Bronze Star and Purple Heart. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Graham Coulter. He sat across from her, opened the file. According to this file, you're dead, killed in a training accident 4 years ago, closed casket funeral. Death certificate signed by me. Sarah said nothing. And yet here you sit, very much alive, very much in violation of about 15 different federal laws. Coulter leaned forward. Want to tell me how a dead woman walks into a naval base with an expired ID? I need to see Admiral Ashcroft. The Admiral doesn't take meetings with corpses. Then tell him Sarah Tenebrae is here about Dylan Kress. See if that changes his mind. Coulter's expression shifted. Micro-expressions. Surprise, recognition, fear. He covered it quickly, but Sarah had been trained to read tells. Dylan's name meant something to this man. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. You signed my death certificate. That means you were read into Sentinel. That means you know about Romania. That means you know we left Dylan Kress behind. Sarah kept her voice level. I also know Dylan's alive, being held by a warlord named Dmitry Volkov in eastern Ukraine. And I know that makes a lot of powerful people very nervous. Coulter stared at her. If what you're saying is true, and I'm not confirming anything, why would you come here? Why not disappear back to whatever hole you've been hiding in? Because I'm done hiding, because Dylan deserves better than to be erased from history, because I made a choice 4 years ago that I've regretted every day since. She leaned forward, matching his intensity. And because I'm going to get him out, with or without official help. I came here as a courtesy, to let Ashcroft know what's about to happen. That's insane. You'd be starting an international incident, violating about 12 different treaties, probably starting a war. Wars have been started for worse reasons. Coulter stood abruptly. Stay here. He left. Sarah heard the lock engage. She settled back in her chair, closed her eyes, regulated her breathing. In through the nose or out through the mouth. The meditation technique Strand had taught them during Sentinel. Clear the mind. Focus on mission. Everything else is noise. 15 minutes passed. 20. Sarah had just begun to wonder if they'd decided to hold her indefinitely when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Multiple people, moving with purpose. The door opened. Admiral Victor Ashcroft entered like a storm in human form. 66 years old, but still carrying the presence that had made him a legend in special operations. His uniform was immaculate. His ribbons told a story of 40 years defending the nation. His eyes, when they found Sarah, carried something she hadn't expected. Relief. Leave us, Ashcroft said to Coulter and the embassy who'd followed him in. Sir, security protocol. Is my concern, not yours. Out. Now. They left. The door closed. Sarah and Ashcroft regarded each other across 4 years of silence and a table that suddenly seemed very small. You look good, Ashcroft said finally. Montana agrees with you. You've been keeping bios. I keep tabs on all my ghosts. He sat down heavily and Sarah saw it then. The gray pallor beneath his tan, the slight tremor in his hands, the way he moved like a man conscious of his body's fragility. The Admiral was dying. I hoped you'd stay disappeared. Dylan's alive. I know. Those 2 words hit Sarah like a physical blow. You know? How long? 4 months, maybe longer. Intelligence is murky in that region. 4 months. Sarah's voice stayed level through sheer force of will. You've known for 4 months that the man we left behind is being tortured in a warlord's compound, and you did nothing. I did what I had to do to protect the mission, protect the institution, protect the other operators who are still alive because we made the hard choices. Ashcroft's voice carried no apology. If we extract Dylan, if he talks, 8 black operations get exposed. Hundreds of operators compromised. Congressional investigations. War crimes tribunals. The entire special operations community gets burned for missions that kept this country safe. Dylan kept this country safe, and we left him to rot. I left him to rot. I gave the order. You just followed it. Ashcroft met her eyes. That's the difference between us, Sarah. I own my decisions, even the ones that cost me sleep. Sarah stood. The cuffs were gone, but her hands clenched anyway. Then own this decision. I'm going after him. I'm bringing him home. And if anyone tries to stop me, I'll burn down every classified operation from here to the Pentagon. Sit down, Lieutenant. I'm not your lieutenant anymore. You made sure of that when you declared me dead. Sit down. Command voice, the one that had sent them into hell a dozen times. Sarah found herself obeying before she consciously decided to. Old training, I'm hard. Ashcroft opened a folder he'd brought with him, pushed it across the table. Before you go on your suicide mission, look at what you're really dealing with. Sarah flipped it open. Satellite photos, intelligence reports, assessment of Volkov's compound, guard strength defensive positions, likely torture protocols, and something else. Communications intercepts marked with Senator Hardwick's name. Hardwick, Sarah said, is negotiating with Volkov, not for Dylan's release, for his execution. Ashcroft's voice was flat. Hardwick's people have offered Volkov $2 million to put a bullet in Dylan's head before the primaries. Make it look like Dylan died resisting interrogation. Bury the body where it'll never be found. Political assassination. National security, according to Hardwick's people. Dylan knows about the diplomat we killed in Paris, the weapons deal we sabotaged in Yemen, the black site we ran in Poland. All missions Hardwick authorized. All missions that would destroy his campaign and probably put him in prison. Sarah studied the intercepts. The negotiations were recent, within the last 72 hours. How long until Hardwick's people arrive? Unknown, days, maybe a week. But Volkov's motivated. $2 million is more than he'd make selling Dylan's intelligence over the next year. Then I don't have much time. You don't have any time, and you don't have resources, and you sure as hell don't have authorization. Ashcroft leaned back. Which is why I'm going to help you. Sarah looked up sharply. Why, Tio? Because I'm dying, heart condition. 6 months if I'm lucky, 3 if I'm not. He said it matter-of-factly like reporting the weather. I've spent 4 years trying to protect Sentinel's legacy, trying to convince myself that leaving Dylan behind was the right choice, the necessary choice. But the truth is I'm just another old man trying to buy redemption I can't afford. I don't want your redemption. No, but you want your own. Same thing I want. Same thing every operator who survives wants. He pulled out another document. Contact information. Garrett Blackwood used to be your instructor at BUD/S. He's retired now, living in Montana about 200 miles from your place. He's also the best tactical mind I've ever worked with. Blackwood hates you, said Sentinel betrayed everything the SEALs stood for. He's right, but he owes Dylan. Mosul 2008. Dylan took shrapnel meant for Blackwood. Saved his life, cost Blackwood his leg. Ashcroft slid the contact info across the table. You want to run this operation, you need his brain. He can't fight anymore, but he can plan. And planning is what'll keep you alive. Sarah took the paper. Why are you doing this? Really, Ashcroft was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 4 decades making impossible choices. Because in 6 months I'll be dead, and I'd like to die knowing I got one thing right, that I brought one of my people home instead of leaving them in the dark. He stood to leave. Sarah stopped him. If I do this, if I extract Dylan, he might testify, might expose everything. Your legacy gets destroyed. My legacy is 12 operators I turned into killers for missions that might not have needed doing. My legacy is a program that broke people and called it training. My legacy is men and women scattered across the world hiding from the choices I forced them to make. Ashcroft's hand rested on the door. If Dylan wants to burn it all down, he's earned that right. Just bring him home alive so he can make that choice. The door closed behind him. Sarah sat alone in the interrogation room, surrounded by files that told the story of betrayal and bureaucracy. She thought about Montana, about the quiet life she'd built from the wreckage of who she used to be, about the ease with which she could walk away from all of this. Then she thought about Dylan's voice on the radio. Sarah, please. She gathered the files, made her choice not because of orders, not because of duty, but because some debts could only be paid in blood and miles, and the kind of determination that looked like madness from the outside. Sarah Tenebrae was going to war, and this time she was bringing everyone home. The road north from San Diego cut through desert that stretched like a promise of emptiness. Sarah drove through the night. Again, the files from Ashcroft spread across her passenger seat. Satellite imagery, guard rotations, topographical maps of eastern Ukraine that might as well have been maps of hell. She'd memorized every detail before leaving Coronado, but her hands kept returning to them anyway, checking and rechecking what she already knew. Dylan was alive. 30 days to extract him. Maybe less if Hardwick's people moved fast. The math was simple. The execution would be anything but. Montana appeared at dawn like a memory surfacing from deep water. Sarah had lived here 4 years, but seeing it now felt different. The mountains no longer represented escape. They represented preparation. Everything she'd done in this place, every skill she'd maintained, while pretending to be nothing more than a hunting guide, had been building toward something she hadn't known she needed. Until now. She drove past her own property without stopping. Blackwoods Ranch lay 200 miles north up roads that turned from paved to gravel to dirt. The kind of place a man went when he wanted the world to forget him. Sarah understood that impulse better than most. The ranch appeared in mid-morning. Small house-weathered barn corrals that hadn't held horses in years. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray line. Sarah parked a quarter-mile out and approached on foot, moving through the tree line with the muscle memory of 1,000 tactical insertions. Old habits, even here, especially here. Garrett Blackwood sat on his porch cleaning a rifle. 62 years old, hair gone white, but his hands moved with the precision of a man who'd spent a lifetime making weapons ready. His left leg ended at the knee, replaced by a prosthetic he'd propped against the porch railing while he worked. He didn't look up when Sarah emerged from the trees, just kept running the cleaning rod through the barrel, methodical and calm. "Coffee's on the stove," Blackwood said. "You know where the cups are." Sarah stopped at the base of the porch steps. "How'd you know I was coming?" Ashcroft called. "Said you'd probably shoot me if I surprised you, so he gave me a heads up." Blackwood set the rifle aside, finally meeting her eyes. "Said you're going after Dylan Kress. Said you're probably going to die trying. He tell you I was asking for help." "Didn't have to. You're here, that says enough." Blackwood fitted the prosthetic back onto his leg, stood with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to navigate a body that no longer worked the way it should. "Come inside. We'll talk about how stupid this plan is before you ignore my advice and do it anyway." The interior of the house smelled like gun oil and wood smoke. Spartan furnishings. Maps on the walls showing terrain from a dozen conflicts. A shelf of books on tactics, strategy, the philosophy of warfare. And in the corner, almost hidden, a photograph of a younger Blackwood standing with a SEAL team in Mosul. Sarah found Dylan in that photograph. Younger, harder, the weight of war not yet carved into his features. Standing next to Blackwood with the easy confidence of men who trusted each other absolutely. "Mosul," Sarah said, 2008. March 15th, shitty day in a city full of shitty days. Blackwood poured coffee, handed her a cup. "Insurgents had us pinned in a building. Sniper on the roof across the street picking us apart. I moved to get a shot, didn't see the RPG. Dylan did, tackled me out of the way, took shrapnel that should have killed me." He gestured to his missing leg. "Lost this in the evac, infection, complications. Ended my career. Dylan saved my life and cost me everything I thought I was." Blackwood's voice carried no bitterness, just the flat acceptance of immutable fact. "I owe him. Have for 16 years. So yeah, Sarah, I'll help you. But first, you're going to tell me why you think you can pull this off." Sarah set down her coffee, pulled out the files, spread them across Blackwood's kitchen table like laying down cards in a game where the stakes were measured in lives. Volkov's compound, eastern Ukraine, 50 kilometers from the Polish border. Garrison strength assessed at 30 to 40 mercenaries. Mix of former Russian military and local fighters. Defensive perimeter includes cameras, motion sensors, and regular foot patrols. Blackwood studied the satellite imagery, his tactical mind already working. Approaches. Limited. Forest to the north and west. Open ground south and east. Single access road heavily monitored. They're dug in like ticks. Air support? None, unsanctioned op. We're on our own. We, Blackwood looked up. Who's we? You got a team I don't know about. Working on it, Ashcroft's providing resources. Coulter volunteered. Coulter, the intelligence officer who faked your death certificate. Blackwood's expression was skeptical. That's a hell of a team, a guilt-ridden analyst and a one-legged instructor who can't run anymore. Plus you, against 40 trained fighters in a fortified position. You got a better idea. Yeah, don't go, let Dylan die. Live with the guilt. It's what I've been doing for 16 years. Blackwood sat back. But you won't do that, because you're like me. Rather die trying than live knowing you didn't. Sarah traced the perimeter on the map. I need your tactical mind, not your body. You can't fight fine, but you can plan. You can see angles I miss. You can keep me from getting killed by my own stubbornness. Blackwood was quiet for a long moment, studying the maps with the intensity of a man reading sacred texts. Frontal assault, suicide, even with surprise. You need a diversion, something that pulls their forces away from Dylan's position. I'm listening. You also need intelligence, real time. Guard positions Dylan's exact location, structural weaknesses. Satellite photos are good for planning, useless for execution. He tapped the compound's center. What's Coulter bringing to the table? Access to signals intelligence, intercepts, comm protocols. He can monitor their radio traffic, maybe even feed them false information. Maybe isn't good enough. You need certainty, one variable you can control. Blackwood leaned forward. Here's what I see. Small team, 3 operators max. You, Coulter, and 1 more. Insertion at shift change 0400 when guards are tired and sloppy. Hit the generator first, kill the lights. Confusion buys you minutes. You move through the darkness like you were born in it. And the exfil, overland to Poland, 60 kilometers through hostile territory. Volkov's people will pursue. You'll need a vehicle, fuel caches, and backup plans for when everything goes wrong. He pulled out a different map, marked it with quick, precise strokes. Here, and here. Safe houses, or what passes for safe in that region. People who owe me favors from the old days. Sarah watched him work, seeing the instructor who'd pushed her through BUUD/S, who taught her that tactical superiority came from thinking 3 moves ahead of the enemy. You said 3 operators. Who's the third? Blackwood set down his pen. Ashcroft sized. He's 66 years old. You saw what I saw. He's dying. He's also the best combat leader I've ever served under, and he's got nothing to lose. Blackwood met her eyes. You need him, Sarah, not for his trigger finger, for his command's presence, for the way he can look at a situation falling apart and find the one thread that holds it together. He's the reason Dylan got captured. He's also the only flag officer willing to risk everything to bring Dylan home. You can hate him for Romania, but you need him for Ukraine. Sarah gathered the maps, considered the weight of bringing Ashcroft into hostile territory. The Admiral who'd given the order that haunted her for 4 years. The man who'd built Project Sentinel on the backs of operators he'd promised to protect. The leader who was trying to buy redemption with the last months of his life. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. Clock's ticking. Hardwick's people are moving. Blackwood stood, walked to the window. There's something else you need to know about Volkov. I've read the files. Files don't tell you everything. I ran missions in that region back in the late 90s. Kosovo, Bosnia, the territories where the maps changed faster than we could update them. Volkov was Spetsnaz then, best of the best. Then the Soviet Union collapsed, and men like him had to find new employment. Warlord's a career choice. For Volkov, it's religion. He hates Americans. Lost his entire family in a NATO airstrike during the Kosovo intervention. Wife, 2 daughters, killed because someone misread coordinates and dropped bombs on a civilian convoy. Blackwood's voice carried the weariness of a man who'd seen too much collateral damage. He's not holding Dylan for money. He's torturing him for revenge. Every day Dylan survives is another day Volkov gets to hurt America through proxy. Sarah absorbed this. Makes him predictable. Makes him dangerous. Revenge doesn't negotiate, doesn't compromise. You walk into his compound, he won't just fight you. He'll try to destroy you. Let him try. Blackwood turned from the window, a sad smile crossing his face. You sound like me 20 years ago. Confident, unbreakable. Certain the mission would bend to your will. He gestured to his prosthetic. Missions don't bend, Sarah. They break you. Question is whether you break in ways you can live with. They spent the rest of the day planning. Blackwood's kitchen table became a command center covered in maps, timelines, equipment lists. Sarah called Coulter on an encrypted line, brought him into the planning. The intelligence officer's voice carried skepticism that slowly transformed into reluctant acceptance. "I can get you weapons," Coulter said through the speaker. "Clean, untraceable, courtesy of Ashcroft's connections. But insertion's your problem. Can't use military transport. Can't involve any official assets." "Commercial flight to Warsaw," Sarah said. "Drive to the border. Cross on foot at night. Carrying enough gear to assault a compound, border security will flag you." Blackwood leaned toward the phone. "Coulter, it's Blackwood. You still have contacts with the private security firms?" "Some. Why?" "Because we use their infrastructure. They run operations all over Eastern Europe. Security consulting, protection details. Nobody questions their movements because half the governments in the region employ them." Blackwood traced a route on the map. "We insert as contractors. Papers say we're providing security assessment for a client in Ukraine. Weapons are part of our standard equipment." Coulter was quiet for a moment. "That could work, but it'll cost. Private security firms don't give away cover identities." "How much?" 50,000, maybe more." Sarah closed her eyes. Her savings from 4 years of hunting guides covered maybe a third of that. "I'll figure it out." "Already figured." Ashcroft's voice cut into the call. Sarah hadn't known he was listening. "Funds are being transferred to an account Coulter will provide. Operational budget's 100,000. Use what you need." "Admiral," Sarah said carefully, "that's your personal money. Dead men don't need bank accounts. Consider it my investment in redemption." There was a pause. "Blackwood's right about using security contractor cover. I've got connections with Sentinel Group, not related to our Sentinel, different outfit. They operate throughout Eastern Europe. I can get you credentials by tomorrow." "What's the catch?" "No catch, just a condition. I'm coming with you." Sarah exchanged glances with Blackwood, who nodded slightly. "Admiral, with respect. I'm coming, not as an operator, as command and control. Someone needs to coordinate with Blackwood, manage intelligence, make the hard calls when everything goes sideways." Ashcroft's voice was firm. "I'm dying, Sarah. Let me die doing something that matters." Blackwood spoke up. "She needs you, Admiral, even if she won't admit it." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to say she could do this alone, that she didn't need the man who'd given the order that started this whole catastrophe. But she'd learned in Sentinel that ego got operators killed. The mission mattered more than pride. "Fine, but in the field I'm in command. My operation, my rules." "Agreed, your operation. I'm just along to make sure you have every advantage I can provide." The call ended. Sarah stood, walked to Blackwood's porch, needed air that wasn't thick with planning and old regrets. The Montana sky stretched overhead, cloudless and indifferent. Somewhere beyond that sky, Dylan Kress was enduring another day of torture. Another day of wondering if anyone was coming. Another day of losing hope. Blackwood joined her, moving with the careful deliberation his prosthetic demanded. "You okay?" "No, but I will be, once this is done." "Sarah, I need you to understand something. What you're about to do, it's not just a rescue mission. It's an act of war against people who will never forgive you. Volkov, Hardwick, maybe even your own government." He stared out at the landscape. "You succeed, you bring Dylan home. But your life, as you know it, ends. Can't come back here. Can't disappear again. You'll be marked. Hunted. Forever looking over your shoulder." "I've been looking over my shoulder for 4 years anyway. At least this way I'll deserve it." "Just making sure you know the part." Sarah thought about her cabin, the quiet life, the illusion of peace she'd built from guilt and isolation. "Some costs are worth paying. This is one of them." They returned inside, spent another 6 hours refining the plan. By midnight, they had a framework. Not perfect, too many variables they couldn't control, but enough to give them a fighting chance. The next 72 hours blurred into preparation. Sarah returned to her cabin, packed what she needed, left everything else. She wrote no letters, made no calls, simply locked the door and walked away from 4 years of her life like shedding a skin that no longer fit. She met Coulter in a parking garage in San Diego. The intelligence officer looked older than he had in the interrogation room, the weight of what they were about to do etched in new lines around his eyes. He handed her a duffel bag. "Credentials, passports, money, weapons catalogs for when you get to Warsaw." But Coulter glanced around the empty garage. "I also included something else. Personal item. From Dylan's effects. We were supposed to destroy everything after Romania, but I kept a few things. Thought maybe someday they'd matter." Sarah opened the bag, found a small notebook. Dylan's handwriting filled the pages. Journal entries from his time in Sentinel, training observations, mission notes, and on the last page dated December 2020, the night before Romania, "If I don't make it back, tell Sarah it wasn't her fault. Orders are orders. She did what she had to do." Sarah's hands tightened on the notebook. He knew it was a suicide mission, knew someone might not make it home. He wanted you to know he didn't blame you. Coulter's voice was quiet. "For what it's worth, I don't blame you either. I blame the system that put you in that position. I blame Ashcroft for giving the order. I blame myself for following through with the cover-up. Lot of blame to go around. Blame later. Mission now." "You sound like a SEAL." "Once upon a time, maybe I was." They flew out of LAX 2 days later. Sarah, Coulter, and Ashcroft on a commercial flight to Warsaw, traveling under the credentials Sentinel Group had provided. To anyone watching, they were security consultants heading to Eastern Europe for a client assessment. The cover was thin but functional. Nobody looked too closely at private military contractors. The post-9/11 world ran on deniable operations and outsourced violence. Ashcroft looked worse under the fluorescent airport lights. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor. He moved carefully like a man conscious of his body's fragility, but his eyes remained sharp, missing nothing. They didn't speak during the flight. Operational security, even encrypted communications, could be compromised. So they sat in silence, each processing what lay ahead in their own way. Sarah closed her eyes and returned to her meditation. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Clear the mind. Focus on mission. Everything else is noise. But Dylan's voice kept breaking through. "Sarah, please." Warsaw greeted them with cold rain and gray skies. They collected their luggage, passed through customs without incident, and met their contact at a hotel near the airport. A man named Victor, mid-40s, former Polish GROM Special Forces, now working private security. He asked no questions, simply provided what they'd paid for. Weapons, night vision equipment, secure communications gear. An SUV with polished plates and false registration. Maps marked with routes to the Ukrainian border. And something else. Current intelligence on Volkov's compound updated within the last 48 hours. "Your target's been busy," Victor said, spreading photos across the hotel room table. "Increased security, new guards. Someone told him to expect trouble." Sarah studied the photos. The compound had indeed been reinforced. Additional cameras, more patrols. The guard strength had increased from 30 to nearly 50. "Hardwick's people," Ashcroft said. "They're not just negotiating with Volkov. They're helping him prepare for an extraction attempt. They know we're coming." Coulter swore quietly. "How we kept this compartmentalized. Doesn't matter how. Matters what we do about it." Sarah traced the new defensive positions. 50 guards changes the math. We can't rely on stealth alone. We need them looking the wrong direction. Blackwood's voice came through the encrypted satellite phone they'd brought. He was back in Montana coordinating remotely. "Then we give them something to look at, a diversion. Make them think the threat's coming from the south while you hit from the north." "What kind of diversion, Ashema?" "Fire, explosives, something loud enough to pull their attention and their people." Blackwood's tactical mind was already working through scenarios. "There's a fuel depot 3 kilometers south of the compound. Commercial facility supplies the surrounding towns. You hit that at 0330, it'll light up like the sun. Every guard in that compound will be watching south." "Civilian facility," Sarah said. "Casualties. Evacuate first. Anonymous tip to local authorities. Fire risk. Get everyone clear, then blow it." Blackwood paused. "I know it's not clean, but clean died when they brought Dylan to that compound." Sarah looked at Ashcroft. The Admiral nodded slowly. "Acceptable collateral damage. We make sure no one's in the facility when it goes up. Beyond that, we do what's necessary." The drive to the Ukrainian border took 18 hours. They moved in stages, stopping at safe houses Blackwood had arranged. Small apartments in forgotten towns. Places where questions weren't asked and memories were short. At each stop, they refined the plan, rehearsed movements, checked equipment, became a team. Sarah watched Ashcroft carefully. The Admiral was declining. She could see it in the way he took his medication, in the shortness of breath that came more frequently. But his mind remained sharp. He coordinated with Blackwood, processed intelligence, made tactical decisions with the confidence of a man who'd spent 40 years in the arena. Coulter surprised her. The intelligence officer who'd spent his career behind a desk moved through equipment checks with competence that spoke of training he rarely used. Former enlisted before he'd gone officer route. Infantry. 2 tours in Iraq before transferring to intelligence. The bureaucrat had been a warrior once, still was underneath the rank and paperwork. They crossed into Ukraine on the 4th night, not at an official checkpoint, but through forest trails that existed on maps only people like Victor knew about. The SUV handled the rough terrain. They drove without lights using night vision, following GPS coordinates toward a future that promised violence. The compound appeared on their scopes 2 nights later. Sarah and Coulter approached on foot, leaving Ashcroft at a position 3 kilometers back with communications equipment and oversight. They moved through darkness like memories covering ground with the efficiency of operators who'd trained for exactly this. The compound matched the satellite imagery, but felt different on the ground. Larger, more imposing. The concrete walls rose like tombstones in the night. Guard towers at each corner, lights blazing in patterns that eliminated shadows. This wasn't just a prison, it was a statement. Volkov announcing to anyone who cared that he was untouchable. Sarah and Coulter observed for 6 hours, counted guards, timed patrols, identified weaknesses, found Dylan's likely location based on the intelligence Victor had provided. A building in the compound's northeast corner. Isolated, heavily monitored. Where you'd keep a prisoner you intended to keep alive but broken. Shift change at 0400, Coulter whispered. 7 minutes of chaos. That's our window. Fuel depot explosion at 0330 gives us the diversion. Guards react move south. We hit from the north during shift change. In and out in 12 minutes. And if it takes longer, then we fight our way out. But it won't take longer. Can't take longer. Sarah's voice carried absolute conviction. We get Dylan, we extract. We don't stop until we're in Poland. They pulled back before dawn, returned to Ashcroft's position. The Admiral had been monitoring radio traffic, building a picture of the compound's routine. He'd also been in contact with Blackwood, finalizing the diversion plan. Fuel depot's clear, Ashcroft reported. Anonymous tip worked. Local authorities evacuated everyone within a kilometer. They think it's a gas leak. Coulter, you'll need to plant the charges at 0300, 30-minute timer. By the time it blows, you're back here ready to move. Coulter nodded. What about Hardwick's people? Any sign they're on site? Victor's sources say a team of 6 Americans arrived yesterday, staying at a hotel in town. They're not on the compound yet, but they're close. We need to move before they integrate with Volkov's security. Sarah checked her watch. 22 hours until go time. We rest now. Move at 0200. Questions. Ashcroft spoke carefully. Sarah, once this starts, there's no stopping. No abort code. We're committed. You understand that I've been committed since Montana, since the first moment I saw Dylan's photograph. This isn't about tactics anymore, Admiral. It's about keeping a promise I made to myself 4 years ago. What promise? That I'd never leave anyone behind again, no matter the darkness. They rested in shifts. Sarah took first watch, sitting in the darkness with a rifle across her lap and Dylan's journal in her pocket. She read his entries by red light, learning things about the man she'd left behind. His doubts about Sentinel. His loyalty to the team despite those doubts. His understanding that some missions required sacrifices no one should have to make. And his final entry, the one that Coulter had shown her. Tell Sarah it wasn't her fault. Sarah closed the journal, looked out at the Ukrainian landscape painted in shades of night. Somewhere in that darkness, Dylan was enduring another round of torture. Another interrogation. Another moment of wondering if anyone remembered he existed. She whispered to the darkness, I'm coming. Hold on just a little longer. The wind carried her words away like a prayer to a God who'd stopped listening long ago. The clock showed 2 o'clock when Sarah's internal alarm pulled her from shallow sleep. No dreams. She'd learned years ago how to shut down her mind completely before operations to rest, without surrendering to the chaos that lived behind closed eyelids. She opened her eyes to darkness and the sound of Coulter checking equipment with methodical precision. Ashcroft sat near the window, silhouetted against the faint starlight. He hadn't slept. Sarah could tell by the way he held himself rigid and alert, despite the exhaustion that must be dragging at him. The Admiral was running on will and medication, pushing a body that was already shutting down. Time, Sarah said quietly. Coulter looked up from the charges he'd been preparing. Ready. 30-minute delay once I activate. I'll be back here by 0315. Gives us 15 minutes before it blows. Extraction route. Memorized. 2 kilometers through the forest, avoiding the road. If I'm not back by 0320, proceed without me. That's not happening. Coulter met her eyes. The mission is Dylan, not me. If something goes wrong, you complete the objective. That's the deal. Sarah wanted to argue, but she recognized the look in his eyes. The same look she'd seen in mirrors for 4 years. The look of someone who'd made peace with the cost of redemption. Don't make me come find you. Wouldn't dream of it. Coulter gathered the charges into a backpack, checked his weapon one final time. See you in 75 minutes. He slipped into the darkness like smoke. Sarah watched him disappear, then turned to her own preparation. Weapons check. Night vision functional. Communications equipment tested. Body armor fitted and secured. Every movement was ritual muscle memory from 1,000 operations. The familiar routine quieted the part of her mind that wanted to think about everything that could go wrong. Ashcroft stood with effort, moved to the table where their maps lay spread. Blackwood's been monitoring local police frequencies. The fuel depot evacuation is holding. No one's questioning the gas leak story. Once it blows, response teams will be tied up for hours. What about Hardwick's mercenaries? Still at the hotel, Victor has eyes on them. 6 men, former special operations, probably Delta or DevGru. They're gearing up but haven't moved yet. My assessment is they're waiting for final authorization from Hardwick before they act. Sarah studied the compound layout one more time, burning every detail into memory. When we extract Dylan, they'll know something's wrong. They'll come after us. Let them. By the time they mobilize, we'll be 30 kilometers away and moving fast. Ashcroft paused. His hand moved to his chest, pressed there for a moment. Sarah, I need to tell you something. About Romania, the order I gave. Sarah continued her equipment check, letting him talk. I've replayed it 10,000 times, tried to convince myself it was right, that saving the mission was worth losing Dylan. But the truth is I was scared of failing, scared of the political fallout, scared that if we didn't complete that operation, everything we'd built would be proven worthless. Sarah secured the last strap on her vest, turned to face him. I appreciate the confession, Admiral. But I stopped blaming you about 2 years ago, started blaming myself instead. Realized that following orders is a choice, same as giving them. We both made choices in Romania. We both have to live with them. Or die trying to fix them. Or that, Sarah checked her watch. Coulter should be placing the charges now. We move in 45 minutes. They waited in silence. Sarah ran through the operation in her mind, visualizing each step. Approach from the north, wait for the explosion, move during the confusion. Breach the perimeter during shift change. Navigate to Dylan's building. Neutralize guards. Extract the package. Exfil to the rally point where their vehicle waited. 60 kilometers to the Polish border. Cross into NATO territory. Deliver Dylan to a safe house where medical personnel Ashcroft had arranged would be waiting. Simple. Clean. Except nothing was ever simple once bullets started flying. At 0314, Coulter materialized from the darkness. His face was streaked with mud and sweat, but he was moving well. No signs of contact. Charges placed. Timer active. 15 minutes, 40 seconds until fireworks. Any complications? Guard patrol came close. Had to wait them out, but the depot's isolated enough that I could work without being seen. Coulter stripped off the backpack, began gearing up for the assault. Once that place goes up, it's going to be visible for 20 miles. Every first responder in the region will converge on it. Ashcroft handed them each a radio earpiece. I'll be monitoring all frequencies. Police fire Volkov's compound and any chatter from Hardwick's people. You'll have real-time intelligence on what's happening around you. Sarah fitted the earpiece, tested the connection. Ashcroft's voice came through clear, comm check. Lima Charlie, Sarah responded. Loud and clear. Coulter confirmed the same. They moved out at 03:25, leaving Ashcroft with the communications equipment and a rifle in case anyone came looking. The Admiral's last words followed them into the darkness. Bring him home. The forest swallowed them. Sarah took point. Coulter 5 meters behind, both moving with the silent efficiency of operators who'd learned to walk through hostile territory like ghosts. The compound's lights created a dome of illumination ahead, a beacon marking their destination. At 03:29, Sarah and Coulter reached their final position. 200 meters from the compound's north wall, concealed in dense undergrowth that provided cover and concealment. From here they could see the guard towers, the patrols, the building where Dylan was being held. Sarah's watch showed 03:30, then 03:31. The seconds crawled by with agonizing slowness. At 3:32, the southern horizon erupted in orange and white. The fuel depot detonated with a roar that echoed across the landscape, a pillar of fire climbing into the night sky like the wrath of an angry god. Even from 3 kilometers away, Sarah felt the concussion wave ripple through the air. The effect on the compound was immediate. Guards shouted. Alarms blared. Searchlights pivoted south, stabbing toward the explosion. Sarah watched through her scope as nearly every guard on the compound's southern perimeter moved toward the fire, drawn like moths to a flame that was consuming millions of liters of fuel. Ashcroft's voice crackled in her ear. Diversion successful. Estimate 35 guards moved to southern positions. Northern sector down to minimum coverage. Shift change in 28 minutes. Window is open. Sarah keyed her radio twice. Acknowledged. She and Coulter waited, counting down the minutes. They needed the chaos to build, needed the compound's routine to fracture further before they made their move. At 03:55, the shift change began. Tired guards coming off duty, fresh guards taking position, 5 minutes of confusion as they handed off responsibilities and positions. Sarah and Coulter moved. They covered the 200 meters in 90 seconds, using the darkness and the distraction to their advantage. The northern fence was chain link, topped with razor wire, illuminated by lights that were now pointed elsewhere. Coulter pulled wire cutters from his kit, began working on the fence with practiced efficiency. The metal parted with soft pings that were lost in the general chaos. Sarah slipped through first weapon up, scanning for threats. The compound's interior was a maze of buildings and open spaces, all designed to make unauthorized movement difficult. But the guards were focused south, watching the fire that painted the sky in shades of apocalypse. Coulter followed her through. They moved along the northern wall, staying in the shadows, navigating toward the northeast building where intelligence suggested Dylan was being held. 50 meters, 40, 30. A guard rounded the corner ahead, young, maybe 25, carrying an AK-47 with casual familiarity. His attention was south toward the fire. He never saw Sarah coming. She closed the distance in 3 strides, one hand clamping over his mouth, the other driving her knife between his ribs and into his heart. The guard's body went rigid, then slack. Sarah lowered him quietly to the ground, retrieved her knife, kept moving. Coulter was already at the building's entrance, working the lock. The door swung open silently. They entered a corridor lit by bare bulbs, concrete walls painted institutional gray. Doors lined both sides. Prison cells. Sarah moved down the corridor, checking each cell through the small window. Empty, empty, empty. Then occupied. A man huddled in the corner, face hidden. Too small to be Dylan. She kept moving, then a voice boomed through speakers mounted in the ceiling. Accented English, cold and measured. "American woman, I know you are here." Sarah froze. "Volkov, you think you can walk into my compound and steal what is mine? Your friend Dylan, he has told me much about you. Sarah Tenebrae, the ghost who abandoned him." Sarah didn't respond, kept moving toward Dylan's cell. "I want you to know something," Volkov's voice continued. "When NATO bombed my family in Kosovo, I was told it was an accident. Collateral damage. The price of freedom." A pause, heavy with rage. "Your government killed my wife, my daughters, 6 and 8 years old, and no one answered for it." Sarah reached the 4th cell, Dylan's cell, worked the lock with hands that remained steady despite the voice echoing through the corridor. "So I have spent 20 years making Americans answer, one at a time. Your Dylan, he lasted longer than most. 4 years. Impressive." The voice carried cruel satisfaction. "But you left him. What kind of operator abandons her team?" The lock clicked open. Sarah pushed through. "The kind who comes back," she whispered. Dylan Crest sat on a concrete bed, wrists chained to the wall, emaciated, bruised, one eye swollen shut, but breathing, alive, looking up as Sarah's face appeared. For a moment he just stared. Then recognition flickered across his features, followed by disbelief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Sarah," his voice was a broken whisper. "You're dead. They showed me the reports." Sarah worked the lock on his chains, her hands steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. "Reports lie. I'm here. We're getting you out." Behind them, alarms began to wail. Volkov had been buying time, rallying his forces. Coulter entered with bolt cutters, began working on the chains that secured Dylan to the wall. The metal parted with sharp cracks that seemed impossibly loud in the small cell. Dylan's hands came free. He tried to stand, stumbled. Sarah caught him and felt how light he was, how much weight he'd lost. 4 years of captivity had reduced him to something barely recognizable. "Can you walk? I can do whatever you need me to do." Ashcroft's voice crackled, urgent, in Sarah's ear. "Contact. Multiple guards converging on your position. North entrance compromised. You need to move now." Sarah got under Dylan's shoulder, took his weight. Coulter took the other side. Together they half-carried Dylan toward the corridor. 2 guards appeared at the end of the hallway. Sarah's hand found her pistol screwed on the suppressor with practiced efficiency. Coulter did the same. 2 shots. Both guards dropped the suppressed rounds, making sounds like books slamming shut. Not silent, but quiet enough that the compound's general chaos swallowed them. "We're blown," Coulter said. "They'll have every guard on us in minutes." Sarah was already moving Dylan between them, heading for the exit. They emerged into the compound's interior. The fire to the south was still raging, but guards were beginning to return to their posts, the initial shock wearing off. A shout from behind. Someone had found the bodies. "North exit," Sarah commanded. "Fast!" They ran, Dylan trying to keep up despite his weakened state, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Guards converged from multiple directions, drawn by the shouts. Gunfire erupted. Rounds cracked past Sarah's head. She returned fire, dropping one guard, then another, moving and shooting with the fluid efficiency of a decade's training. Coulter laid down, covering fire, his rifle barking in controlled bursts. They reached the fence, the cut section Sarah had used to enter. Dylan went through first, then Coulter, Sarah providing cover. More guards appeared. The compound was fully alert, now every defensive position manned and firing. Sarah ducked through the fence, around, clipping her shoulder and spinning her partway around. Pain flared hot and immediate. She ignored it, kept moving, half dragging Dylan into the forest as Coulter continued to engage targets. Ashcroft's voice, multiple contacts pursuing. Estimate 20 hostiles. Vehicle patrol mobilizing from the motor pool. You need to move faster. Working on it, Sarah gasped. They crashed through the forest branches, tearing at faces and gear. Behind them, flashlights bobbed and the voices shouted coordinates. The guards were organized, experienced, closing the distance with professional efficiency. Dylan stumbled, went down hard. Sarah pulled him up, felt the tremor in his limbs. He was running on adrenaline and will nothing else. "Stay with me, Dylan. We're almost there." "Go, leave me, complete the mission." "Fuck the mission. We all go home or none of us do." They reached the rally point at 423. Their SUV sat where they'd left it, Ashcroft in the driver's seat with the engine already running. The Admiral's face was gray. His breathing labored, but his hands were steady on the wheel. Sarah and Coulter loaded Dylan into the back seat. Sarah climbed in beside him while Coulter took the passenger seat. The vehicle lurched forward before the doors were fully closed, Ashcroft navigating the rough forest trail with the recklessness of a man who had nothing left to lose. Behind them, vehicle headlights appeared through the trees, Volkov's forces in pursuit. "Contact rear," Coulter called. 2 vehicles, technical truck with mounted gun and a pursuit vehicle. Ashcroft pushed the SUV harder, the suspension screaming, as they bounced over terrain that barely qualified as a road. Sarah braced Dylan against the violent motion. His wounds needed attention, but they'd have to wait until they crossed the border. The technical truck opened fire. Rounds stitched across their rear window, spiderwebbing the glass but not penetrating. Armored. Thank God for Ashcroft's preparation. Coulter leaned out the passenger window, returned fire with his rifle. The technical truck swerved its gunner, ducking for cover, but it kept coming relentless. They hit the main road at 0435. Ashcroft turned north, accelerating hard. The SUV's engine roared. Behind them, the technical truck matched their speed. "Roadblock ahead," Ashcroft reported. His voice was strained. 3 vehicles, armed men. Volkov must have called ahead. Sarah leaned forward, assessed the situation. 3 vehicles blocking the road a kilometer ahead. The technical truck behind. Forest on both sides, too dense for the SUV to navigate. They were boxed in. "Ram it," Sarah said. "That's suicide." "No, that's commitment. Hit the center vehicle at speed. We punch through or we die trying. Either way, we're not stopping." Ashcroft met her eyes in the rearview mirror. Something passed between them. Understanding, acceptance. The acknowledgement that they'd reached the point where all choices led to violence. "Hold on," the Admiral said. He floored the accelerator. The SUV surged forward, engine screaming. The roadblock grew rapidly larger. Sarah could see the men behind the vehicles, see them raising weapons, see the moment they realized the SUV wasn't slowing down. Impact at 90 kilometers per hour. The armored SUV hit the center vehicle broadside, lifting it off its wheels and sending it tumbling. Metal shrieked. Glass exploded. The SUV plowed through, fishtailing as Ashcroft fought for control. They emerged on the other side, damaged but mobile. The roadblock was behind them. The technical truck tried to follow, but got tangled in the wreckage. Sarah looked back through the shattered rear window. They'd created enough distance to matter. "How far to the border?" 45 kilometers, Ashcroft said. His voice was barely a whisper now. One hand clutched his chest, the other white-knuckled on the wheel. "Admiral, I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. Sarah could see it in his face, the way he was struggling for each breath. The heart attack was coming. Coulter saw it too. "Admiral, let me drive." "No time. We stop, they catch us." Ashcroft kept his foot on the accelerator, kept them moving north even as his body began to fail. "Sarah, in my jacket, nitroglycerin, under the tongue." Sarah reached forward, found the pills, got two under Ashcroft's tongue while he drove one-handed. The medication might buy him time. Might not. Either way, they couldn't stop. Dylan stirred beside her. "Sarah, the Admiral. He's holding it together like the rest of us." She checked Dylan's pulse. Weak but steady. "How you doing?" "Been better. Been worse too." Sarah wanted to respond, but Ashcroft's labored breathing cut through the moment. The Admiral was declining fast, his face ashen, his grip on the wheel loosening. "Coulter, take the wheel." The intelligence officer reached over, grabbed the wheel as Ashcroft's foot stayed on the accelerator. They managed an awkward transfer of control, Coulter sliding into the driver's seat while Sarah pulled Ashcroft into the back. The Admiral collapsed against her, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Stay with me, Admiral. We're 30 kilometers out. You don't get to die before we cross that border." Ashcroft's eyes found hers. Each word cost him everything. "Sarah, Hardwick's people. Victor called. They mobilized 20 minutes ago, heading to border, to cut you off. When? They'll beat us there." Ashcroft's hand clutched at Sarah's vest. "You'll have to fight through them. 6 operators, well-trained. Hardwick gave them kill orders. No survivors." Sarah processed this. They'd escaped Volkov's compound, evaded pursuit, punched through a roadblock, and now 6 American special operators waited ahead to kill them all in the name of political expediency. "Coulter, how long to the border?" 25 minutes at current speed." "Push it. We need to get there before Hardwick's people get set up." Ashcroft's breathing became more labored. His hand found Sarah's, gripped it with surprising strength. "Get Dylan across. Tell everyone what we did. Good and bad, all of it. Truth matters more than legacy." "You'll tell them yourself, Admiral. Stay with me." But Victor Ashcroft's eyes were already closing. His chest rose, once more fell, and didn't rise again. Sarah felt for a pulse. Nothing. She began CPR compressions on a chest that barely moved. "Don't you dare die on me. Not after everything." Dylan's hand touched her arm. "Sarah, he's gone." She stopped the compressions, closed Ashcroft's eyes. The man who'd given the order that haunted her. The man who'd spent his last months trying to make it right. The leader who'd died before seeing Dylan safe. "He got us this far," Dylan said quietly. "Now we finish it." Sarah laid Ashcroft's body gently across the seat, checked her weapons, reloaded. They were 15 minutes from the border, 15 minutes from safety or slaughter. "Coulter, when we hit the border, we're going to face resistance. Hardwick's people will be set up in defensive positions. Can't go around, forest is too dense and we don't have time." Coulter's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "We'll have to punch through." "Not we, me." Sarah's voice was calm. "You and Dylan cross the border. I'll provide cover, draw their fire, give you the time you need." "That's suicide." "That's the mission. Dylan's the objective. Getting him across is all that matters." Sarah checked her rifle, her pistol, the grenades on her vest. "I've made peace with this, Coulter. Don't take that away from me." They crested a hill. Below, the border crossing appeared, a simple checkpoint between Ukraine and Poland, normally staffed by board guards checking passports. Tonight it was a killing field. 6 men in tactical gear occupied positions on both sides of the crossing. Professional spacing. Overlapping fields of fire. They'd turned the checkpoint into an ambush site, waiting for their target to drive into the trap. Sarah saw all this in an instant. Saw the impossibility of driving through. Saw the only play that might work. Stop the vehicle, 200 meters out. Coulter hit the brakes. The SUV skidded to a halt. Sarah was already moving out the door, grabbing her rifle and extra magazines. "Give me 5 minutes. When you hear sustained gunfire, you drive. Fast as you can. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just get Dylan across that border." "Sarah, that's an order, Lieutenant Colonel." She met his eyes. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them about Sentinel, about Dylan, about Ashcroft. Make sure it means something." She didn't wait for a response. Just moved into the darkness beside the road, circling wide to flank Hardwick's position. The 6 operators were focused on the road, expecting the vehicle to come to them. They wouldn't expect a lone operator to come hunting them. Sarah found her first position 300 meters east of the checkpoint, a small rise that gave her elevation and cover. She settled behind a fallen tree, acquired her first target through the scope. A man in his 30s, former military bearing, carrying an M4 bar with professional familiarity. She thought about Ashcroft's words. Truth matters more than legacy. She thought about Dylan's journal. Tell Sarah it wasn't her fault. She thought about 4 years of running and hiding and carrying guilt that wasn't entirely hers to carry. Then she exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The man dropped. The other 5 reacted instantly, trained responses, seeking cover and scanning for the shooter. Sarah had already moved, running 20 meters to a new position before they could acquire her location. This was what she'd trained for. What Blackwood had taught her in BUD/S. What Project Sentinel had honed to a lethal edge. Solo operation against superior numbers. Movement, aggression. Never staying still long enough to become a target. Second shot. The round caught an operator in the shoulder, spinning him. Not a kill, but a wound that took him out of the fight. The remaining 4 were fully alert now, returning fire toward her last position. Rounds chewed through the forest, but Sarah was already repositioning again. Third shot, clean headshot at 250 meters. The operator went down hard, 3 left. They were adapting now, working as a team, one providing cover while the others moved. Professional, dangerous. These weren't mercenaries. These were Tier 1 operators, men who'd spent careers doing exactly what she was doing now. Sarah heard the SUV's engine roar to life behind her. Coulter was making his run. The 3 remaining operators divided their attention, 2 moving to intercept the vehicle, 1 staying to suppress Sarah. She dropped the one providing suppressive fire with a chest shot that punched through the gap between armor plates. The operator fell, choking on blood. Then she broke from cover, sprinting toward the 2 moving to intercept Coulter and Dylan. Her boots pounded the earth. Her breath came in measured pulls. Everything narrowed to the next shot, the next movement, the next second of staying alive. The SUV accelerated toward the checkpoint. The 2 operators opened fire rounds, hitting the armored windshield and body panels. The vehicle kept coming, Coulter driving with his head down, trusting the armor to hold. One operator moved to block the road with his body weapon raised. A suicide play meant to force the SUV to slow down or swerve. Sarah fired on the run. Difficult shot. Low probability. But the round found its target, hitting the operator high in the chest and knocking him backward. The SUV roared past, clipped the wounded man, and sent him tumbling. The last operator tracked Sarah with his rifle. They fired simultaneously. His round caught her in the side, punching through her armor at the seam between plates. Her round took him in the throat. They both went down. Sarah hit the ground hard, pain exploding through her torso like white fire. She could feel blood, hot and wet, soaking through her clothing. The wound was bad, maybe fatal. But when she looked up, she could see the SUV in the distance, past the checkpoint, into Polish territory. Dylan was safe. She'd done it. Kept the promise she'd made to herself in that Montana cabin. Brought her operator home. The cost didn't matter. The mission was complete. Sarah tried to stand, failed. Her legs wouldn't respond properly. She managed to prop herself against a tree, rifle across her lap, scanning for threats. The 6 operators were down. Some dead, some wounded. The wounded ones weren't moving, too hurt to continue fighting. Her radio crackled. Coulter's voice. Sarah, we're across. Dylan's secure. Polish authorities are here. Where are you? She tried to respond, found her voice weak. Mission complete. Get Dylan medical attention. Sarah, what's your position? We're coming back for you, Negative. Stay in Poland. That's an order. She coughed, tasted blood. Tell Dylan I came back. Sarah, she pulled the earpiece out, dropped it on the ground. The night was quiet now. The gunfire ended, just the wind through trees and her own labored breathing. Sarah closed her eyes, thought about Montana, about the cabin she'd never see again, about the life she'd traded for this moment. No regrets. She'd made her choice. Lived with the consequences. Died with them too. Footsteps approached through the darkness. Multiple people. Sarah tried to raise her rifle, found she lacked the strength. If these were Volkov's people coming to finish her, so be it. At least Dylan had made it. But the voice that spoke was American. Familiar. Stand down, operator. We're friendly. Sarah opened her eyes, saw American soldiers in Polish military uniforms. A medical team with them. They moved with practiced efficiency, assessing her wound, applying pressure, calling for a stretcher. Who, she managed. NATO Quick Reaction Force. We've been monitoring the situation since you crossed into Ukraine. Your Admiral Ashcroft arranged contingency protocols weeks ago. When our sensors detected the firefight at the border, we mobilized immediately. The soldier, a captain by his insignia, knelt beside her. You're in Polish territory now. Sovereign soil. Volkov can't touch you here. They loaded her onto a stretcher. Sarah tried to track what was happening, but shock and blood loss were dragging her down. She caught glimpses. The border checkpoint. The fallen operators. The SUV with its doors open and Coulter standing beside it, talking urgently to Polish officials. And Dylan, walking with assistance but alive, looking back toward where they'd brought Sarah from. Their eyes met across the distance. Dylan raised one hand, a salute that carried the weight of 4 years and a promise kept. Sarah managed to raise her hand in return. Then the darkness took her. She woke in a hospital. White walls, antiseptic smell, the beep of monitors tracking her vitals. Sunlight streamed through a window, painful after so much darkness. Sarah tried to sit up, discovered she was restrained. Not cuffs, just medical restraints to keep her from tearing her stitches. A nurse entered, saw she was awake, left quickly. Returned a minute later with a doctor who checked her chart with the dispassionate efficiency of medical professionals who'd seen everything. You're lucky to be alive, the doctor said in accented English. The round missed your major organs by centimeters. You lost a lot of blood, but you'll recover. Where am I? American Hospital, Ramstein Air Base, Germany. You were airlifted from Poland 2 days ago. The doctor made notes on his tablet. You have visitors waiting. I've been instructed to allow them in once you're awake, if you feel up to it. Sarah nodded. The doctor left. The door opened again a minute later. Coulter entered first, looking exhausted but alive. Behind him came Dylan, walking without assistance. Now the worst of the bruising faded, but his eyes carrying shadows that would take longer to heal. You're awake, Coulter said, something like relief crossing his features. We weren't sure. The doctor said it could go either way. Takes more than one bullet to kill me. Sarah's voice was raspy. Dylan, you okay? Getting there, they've been treating me. Physical therapy, psychological evaluation, the whole rehabilitation protocol. Dylan pulled a chair close to her bed, sat carefully. I'll heal. Good. Dylan reached out, took her hand. His grip was stronger than it had been in the compound. Sarah, you came back after 4 years, after everything. You came back for me. Had to, couldn't live with leaving you behind. Coulter told me about Montana, about the guilt you've been carrying, about how you've been living. Dylan's voice was gentle. You need to hear this. What happened in Romania that wasn't on you? You followed orders in an impossible situation. I chose to follow those orders, and I would have made the same choice. Dylan squeezed her hand. I've had 4 years in that cell to think about it, to understand that we were all just pieces on a board being moved by people who never had to pay the cost. Ashcroft gave the order. You executed it. That's how the system works. That's how it broke us. Sarah looked past him to Coulter. Ashcroft, being returned to the States with full military honors. The truth about Project Sentinel is coming out. Congressional hearings scheduled. Senator Hardwick. Coulter's expression was grim. Hardwick withdrew from the presidential race at 6 a.m. the morning after we crossed the border. By noon, FBI had raided his campaign headquarters. By evening, the DOJ announced charges: conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and violations of the Geneva Convention. He'll die in prison if he makes it to trial. He bought our lives with his legacy, Sarah said quietly. He bought a lot more than that. The truth, accountability, a chance for all the Sentinel operators to come in from the cold. Coulter pulled out a file. There are 8 of you left, besides you and Dylan, scattered across the world, hiding. Ashcroft's confession gives them immunity. They can come home. Sarah absorbed this. The 12 operators who'd never officially existed could finally stop running, could finally tell their stories, could finally be real again. What about me, legal status? Complicated. You technically died 4 years ago. Resurrecting you is going to require paperwork that doesn't exist yet. But you've got advocates, military brass who respect what you did, politicians who see you as proof the system needs reform. Coulter shrugged. You'll probably testify, probably become famous in a way you never wanted, but you'll be alive and free. Dylan spoke up. I'm testifying. Everything Volkov did, everything Hardwick authorized, every mission Sentinel ran that crossed the line from necessary to criminal. It's all going public. That'll destroy careers. Good. Some careers deserve destroying. Dylan's voice was hard. We were turned into weapons and pointed at problems politicians didn't want to solve legitimately. Time to own that. Time to make sure it doesn't happen again. They talked for another hour about the mission, about Ashcroft's death, about Blackwood, who'd coordinated everything from Montana and was already being brought to Washington to consult on the investigation, about the future that stretched ahead, uncertain and complicated, but possible. Eventually, the doctors insisted Dylan and Coulter leave so Sarah could rest. They left reluctantly, promising to return the next day. Sarah lay alone in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling. Her side ached where they'd repaired the damage. Her body felt like it had been through a war, which she supposed it had. But Dylan was alive. The mission was complete. The truth was coming out. For the first time in 4 years, Sarah Tenebrae allowed herself to feel something other than guilt. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in Arlington National Cemetery. She wore a dress uniform she'd never officially earned, attending a funeral for a man who'd shaped her life in ways she was still understanding. Admiral Victor Ashcroft was laid to rest with full military honors. The ceremony was attended by hundreds: generals, politicians, operators from a dozen different units. People who'd served with him, served under him, been shaped by his leadership for better and worse. The honor guard fired their salute. The flag was folded and presented to Ashcroft's sister, an older woman who'd spent 40 years watching her brother disappear into classified operations she'd never understand. Sarah stood beside Dylan, both of them in the second row behind the official mourners, but ahead of the crowd. Coulter stood with them, along with Blackwood, who'd flown in from Montana despite his age and disability, and Reverend Strand, who'd given the eulogy, speaking about redemption and sacrifice and the weight of command. After the ceremony, as people dispersed, Strand approached Sarah and Dylan. The old chaplain's eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "Sarah, I'm glad you made it back." "Barely," she gestured to her healing wound. "Barely counts." Strand looked at Dylan. "And you? 4 years I prayed for you, thought those prayers went unanswered. Glad to be wrong." Dylan clasped Strand's hand. "Your prayers got answered, Reverend. Just took a while." Strand smiled sadly. "God's timing isn't ours." He turned back to Sarah. "What you did bringing him home, that was sacred work, the kind that saves souls, his and yours." Sarah felt the weight of those words. "I didn't do it for redemption." "I know. That's why it worked." Strand placed his hands on both their shoulders. "You two have been given a second chance. Don't waste it carrying old guilt. Use it. Build something that matters." "We will," Dylan said. Strand nodded, squeezed their shoulders once, and walked away toward the chapel. Dylan and Sarah walked through the cemetery in silence. The autumn leaves were falling, painting the ground in shades of gold and red. "What will you do now?" Dylan asked. "Testify. Tell the truth. Then, I don't know. Can't go back to Montana. Can't disappear again. Maybe that's good. Maybe it's time to stop running." "You could work with me. We're forming a group, former Sentinel operators, advocacy for special operations personnel who've been burned by the system, making sure what happened to us doesn't happen to the next generation." Sarah considered this. A new mission, a new purpose, using the skills they'd learned not to kill but to protect. "I'll think about it." They walked in silence for a while. Then Dylan stopped, turned to face her. Sarah reached into her jacket, pulled out the small notebook, Dylan's journal. The pages worn from her reading them over and over during the mission. "Coulter gave this to me, your last entry, the night before Romania." She opened to the final page, showed him his own words. "You wrote that it wasn't my fault, that orders are orders." Dylan looked at the notebook, then at her. "I meant every word." "I know, but I didn't believe it until now." Sarah held the journal out to him. "This is yours." Dylan shook his head. "Keep it. Reminds you that I never blamed you, not for a second." He pulled her into an embrace, careful of her still healing wound. "We're even. We're good. Let it go." Sarah held on to him, feeling the solidity of his presence, the proof that her choices had meant something. That redemption was possible, even for those who'd committed the unforgivable. They stood there for a long time, two survivors of a program that had tried to break them, holding each other up in a cemetery full of honored dead. Eventually they separated, walked back toward the entrance where Coulter and Blackwood waited. The four of them, all that remained of Project Sentinel's leadership and its casualties, standing together in the fading light. "What happens now?" Coulter asked. Sarah looked at the three men who'd become her family through fire and betrayal, and the slow process of finding truth in a world built on lies. "Now we make sure it mattered, all of it. The missions, the sacrifices, the people we lost. We make sure their stories get told. We make sure the system changes. We make sure no one else gets erased the way we were." Blackwood nodded slowly. That's a mission I can get behind. Me too, Dylan said. Coulter simply extended his hand. Sarah shook it, feeling the weight of a new promise being made. Not to government or orders or the mission, but to each other, to the truth, to the future they'd paid for in blood and years. They left the cemetery together as the sun set over Washington. Four people who'd been declared dead or disappeared or discarded, walking into a future they'd fought to earn. Sarah Tenebrae was done running, done hiding, done carrying guilt for choices made in impossible circumstances. She was ready to fight a different kind of war. The kind fought in hearing rooms and press conferences and the slow grinding work of institutional change. The kind of war that couldn't be won with bullets, but might be won with truth. Behind them, Arlington's white headstones stretched in perfect rows, monuments to sacrifice and service. Among them now rested Victor Ashcroft, a man who'd lived in shadows and died in the light. Sarah whispered a final goodbye to the Admiral, to the life she'd left behind, to the woman she'd been before Ukraine. Then she turned toward tomorrow and walked into it with her eyes open and her conscience clear. The mission was complete. The promise was kept. The dead were honored and the living would remember. That Sarah decided was enough.